Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is the Michigan Football Channel, the voice of college football. I am your host, Dre, and I'm here with Mark Rogers. Desmond will not be here for today's broadcast, but he will be back for the post-game show. No, I do not have some catchy intro that like Des does. He has a gift, and I'm not going to try to replicate what he does well. But glad to be here. Mark, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. Doing well. I told somebody earlier today that if you count them up, there are 63 games played in the Big Ten conference games. And with all due respect to the Big Ten Western Division, unless they pull off some miraculous upset in the championship game, which nobody anticipates, they're basically the whole season comes down to 3 games. It's Ohio State, Penn State. It's the game at the end of November, and it's this Saturday.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're actually joined now by Marty Leaf. He's going to be representing Black Shoe Diaries. Uh, Give us a Penn State side. Marty, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me on, guys. Looking forward to it.
Marty, what's going on?
Not too much, Mark. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. Thanks for joining us.
Absolutely.
Well, Marty, you're here. This is a big game this week. Obviously, two teams with, I believe, identical, obvious goals. When the Big Ten get to the playoff, both of them have won the Big Ten title within the last, 6 years. Well, yeah, 6 years. So, and very, very relevant every year. So, kind of give us your side about, Penn State. What really is this football team? Obviously, you have a very, very experienced quarterback in Sean Clifford, but an obvious NFL talent, as you guys always do. But what should we expect on Saturday?
Yeah, I think this is a Penn State football team that is not the team a lot of people were expecting coming into the year, Penn State fans included. I think Penn State being 5-0 is not necessarily a surprise. The Penn State fans, or even I'm sure a lot of people in the national media, when you look at their first 5 games, especially once they took care of business against Purdue and Auburn. But the defense has been really good, a lot better than anybody could have anticipated. Year one Manny Diaz, and as we'll definitely get into as the show goes on, most importantly and surprisingly in a good way, this is the best Penn State offensive line since probably at least 2012, maybe 2013.
Wow.
Yeah, this offensive line is really good, and it has not been really good in a really long time. And that has led to the running game being the best it's been in a long time. It also helps when you have the number one running back in last year's recruiting class, who's the National Player of the Year now on your roster. But yeah, it's a team that I think has surprised people, not necessarily by the record, but more so how they got there, and with an offense that's been riding a strong offensive line and a really good rushing attack with an uberly aggressive defense that has just forced turnovers at a just absolutely ridiculous rate.
Yeah, one of the things that really kind of stuck out to me from an outside view is that rushing attack that Penn State has, and obviously, I'm sure that's spearheaded by their offensive line play. Um, but on the flip side, Michigan has a pretty good, front seven. They definitely have a size. Maji Smith, the number one freak on the Bruce Feldman's college football freak list. He's done an excellent job controlling the interior. How do you think Penn State's going to do versus a pretty good Michigan front seven? Probably the best front seven they faced all year.
Yeah, definitely the best front seven they've faced all year. No disrespect to Auburn or Purdue on that front, but you mentioned Mazi Smith, and he's a guy James Franklin mentioned in his press conference on Tuesday, really as the, we cannot let him wreck this game kind of guy. Like you said, absolute freak, has that game wrecking ability. I think if you're Penn State, if you want to get this running game going on Saturday, which obviously they're going to want to do, I think you need to really try and run away from him. Obviously when you have a player of that caliber, you want to do what you can as an offense to neutralize their ability to wreck the game. So, don't try and get cute, don't overthink it and try, strength on strength or whatever. If you don't have to, don't be afraid to run away, come out, see where he's lined up on defense, change your play at the line if you need to. That said, I think we're going to get some really good battles on in the trenches this week. The interior of Penn State's offensive line, led by 50-year senior center Drew Scruggs, who's a guy who's going to have a very long, successful career in the NFL, has been really strong. I think we're going to get a lot of fun battles on Saturday up front. But yeah, Mozzie Smith is definitely a guy that if you're Penn State, he's the one you circle in that Michigan defense, I think. And obviously Michigan's defense has a ton of tremendous players. You know, Mike Morris, Yabi Anobi. I apologize for pronouncing his name wrong. The transfer from Alabama, who Penn State fans should remember well and know well from his recruitment, both having tremendous years off the edge for the Wolverines. But yeah, Smith is the guy. If you cannot control him, if you cannot block him, he can derail this rushing attack before it gets going. And that's the one thing Penn State cannot allow to happen on Saturday.
When I look at these two teams, Marty, Andre, what I see is kind of from a personnel standpoint, almost a carbon copy of each other outside of the quarterback position, where I even looked at the total team composite rankings from 247 Sports, where they look at the entire roster, and they're number 14 and they're number 15. They're just very comparable teams, the way they've recruited. They play similar styles. I'm not going to try to X's and O's it to the nth degree, because they obviously have different nuances to their offenses and defenses, no doubt. But just their style of play is pretty similar. And, it's going to come down to who executes better, of course, where the turnovers come. But I'm going to take it to the skill position players on both sides of the ball, because I think, one thing that I delved a little deeper into, and I watched Penn State, probably half of the Auburn game. I watched the entire Purdue game, and then I ducked in, for a few plays here and there in their other games. And when I saw that they were 102nd Penn State in passing defense, I thought, there's no way that this is the 102nd ranked pass defense in the country. They are way too good for that. Joey Porter, Jair Brown, they've got too many future NFL players for that. So I went a little bit deeper, and yeah, that's where total yardage statistics really don't tell the story. Penn State opponents have passed against them more than any team in the country. They're being passed on 45 times a game. So that's number one. You're going to give up a lot of yardage when your opponents are passing more on you than any team in the country. Number two, they're giving up less than 50% completion percentage. Passers have only thrown 5 TDs and 5 picks against them. So the efficiency rating, I think, was number 7 in the country. So don't look at total yardage. 7th rated pass efficiency defense in the country.
Yeah.
Yeah. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say real quick on that. Tim and I talked about this on our post game show after the Northwestern game, and we talked about that exact thing. Where to us it makes no sense why teams are throwing the ball so much against Penn State. I get it. The Purdue game, Penn State led most of the way. Same thing with Auburn. I mean, obviously there are 3 other wins were pretty commanding against inferior opponents, and again led much of the way. But the secondary is really good. They have, I think, like 47 or 48 pass breakups on the year. The second most in the country is like 25. It's a very talented group. Joey Porter Jr. might be a top 10 pick in April. Jair Brown, who you mentioned, Mark, another going to be a high pick. Kalen King, opposite Joey Porter Jr., Detroit kid, who I'm sure will be very motivated on Saturday. Another potential first-round pick. Lots of talent in the secondary. So yeah, I have not been able to figure out at all why teams have thrown so much against Penn State. But yeah, they've done it, and no one has found success doing it, regardless of the total yardage. Like you said, you need to dig a little bit deeper than that. As you dig deeper, you see the secondary has been really good.
Yeah. Well, to that point, to the Michigan's passing game. Look, the big hoopla, this season's been about J.J. McCarthy, the emergence of J.J. McCarthy. He's finally taken over the keys, and I would say that the passing game has been a work in progress. JJ himself, he's gotten better every week. I think the biggest portion of his game that he's still working on is his touch passes, especially for deep shots down the field. But for the most part, his decision making has been very sound. He's a lot more athletic than Cade McNamara, who Penn State saw last year. So he presents a totally different type of dynamic. But still, the strength of this Michigan offense is their rushing attack. Especially spearheaded by Blake Corum, and then now with Donovan Edwards getting back healthy again, he's also going to be in the mix as well. Um, Talk to me about the Penn State rush defense. Do you think they're going to be able to, I guess, you tame Blake Corum? And if not, do you think that is a avenue that Michigan can exploit this defense?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I think anytime you play Michigan, that's what's most important for your defense, right? You've got to contain Corum. You mentioned Donovan Edwards, really talented kid, 5-star kid himself coming out of high school. That's a pretty nasty two-headed combination for any defense. With Penn State, I think Saturday is going to be one of those games you've got to concede. You're going to give up yards. You're not going to completely shut down a rushing attack like that. I don't care if it's, Alabama, Georgia, Ohio State. You're not going to stop. You're not going to stop that rushing attack. You've got to contain. Penn State's defensive line has played better than expected this year. It's been really good. PJ Mustipher, who last year got hurt again, it was the injury against Iowa everyone forgot about. Everyone remembered Sean Clifford getting hurt. People overlooked PJ Mustipher getting hurt in that game and being lost for the rest of the season. I mean, Mustipher played 5.5 games last year and was still a second-team all-conference defensive tackle, which really says something. He was a little slow to start the year coming back from his knee injury, but the last 2 weeks has looked like PJ Mustipher of last year. Hakeem Beamon, another guy, defensive tackle, is having a really nice season beside Mustipher. I think those two guys need to be disruptive. I'm confident they can contain this rushing attack, and by contain, keep them 4.5 yards a carry. If you can do that against a rushing attack this good, I think you're happy with your defense. And what's going to be important for Penn State's defense is when they are able to get Michigan behind the sticks into a 3rd and long, you got to get off the field. This pass rush has been solid. The sack numbers haven't always been there, but they've just been terrorizing opposing quarterbacks, which has contributed greatly to the amount of pass breakups and how good the passing efficiency has been for the defense. So I'm confident in them in that situation. And like you said, McNamara is a guy still working on that deep ball. And with Penn State's corners, I think Manny Diaz would be comfortable putting them out there on an island, putting 8 guys in the box on Saturday. And I think if PJ Mustipher, Hakeem Beamon, this defensive line can be disruptive against the Michigan offensive line that, you would know better than me, but I think probably if you're a Michigan fan, you still want to see them probably take another step or two at times. I think that if Penn State's defensive line can do that, the linebackers can feel. The linebackers coming in the year is probably the biggest concern on this team. Have they been great? No, but they've been serviceable. They haven't been the maybe major concern or liability that people had expected. I think if you can get serviceable play out of your linebackers, your defensive line can continue to play the way it has this year for Penn State. You feel good that you can at least keep Michigan to, like I said, that 4 to 4.5 yards a carry. Blake Corum's a stud, man. You're going to give up some chunk runs. So yeah, it's unavoidable that, again, Corum can face the best defense in the country. He's going to have some 15, 20-yard gallops against you. It's when you get them into 2nd and 12, 3rd and 6, you got to get off the field. And I think Penn State's defensive line will play well enough to force enough of those to give them a chance to win this game.
Yeah, and when I think about these two teams, and I haven't watched obviously a lot of Penn State, but I watch all of Michigan's games, and because I do believe that these two teams are very comparable in talent, and therefore even play style for that matter. I think another big part of this game is going to be discipline and penalties. Who's going to play the most fundamentally sound football, who's not going to beat themselves. Michigan, for the most part, especially last year, I thought that was their biggest strength, above everything. And they had a lot of good things going for them last year, obviously, but they never beat themselves. This year, for the most part, they've still been pretty good with penalties, but they've had a little bit more sloppier than last year, but definitely still doing pretty well overall. How does Penn State do in that particular area in terms of discipline?
Yeah, for the most part, to start the year, they've been pretty good with it. The biggest issue really in terms of beating yourself was those fumbles against Northwestern. And twofold. One, the weather was horrible that day. Anyone who watched any of that game,
like a typhoon.
Yeah, and trust me, typhoons in early October in central Pennsylvania, as someone who's lived in this area my entire life, it's cold rain. It's not a nice, cool me off summer drizzle. It's cold, and it makes it hard to grip the football. It's not fun.
Right.
And for Penn State's sake, thank God that game was against Northwestern, because against anyone else, they probably don't get out of there with a win with how they played. But
What is
Right.
the statistical anomaly there? Who wins a game by double digits that loses the turnover battle 5-0?
yeah, that
Wow.
I remember after the game, Tim and I trying to do some research before we came on the air, and it was the first time since I think 2003 is either 03 or 04. Penn State had 5 turnovers and won a game. We could not find the last time they were -5 though in the turnover battle and won a game. So it was just, again, thank God it was Northwestern. But
Yeah.
yeah, no, penalty wise, they've been good. That's actually been one thing they've cleaned up from last year, especially with the secondary, and I think that's what's helped this secondary take a big jump. Last year there was a lot of holding penalties, a lot of pass interference penalties. And this year, they've really been able to kind of find that fine line better of being aggressive, being physical, but not drawing flags. Joey Porter Jr. especially. Honestly, had it not been for penalty issues, I think Joey Porter Jr. goes pro after last year. But penalties
Wow.
probably kept him from would have been a first-round pick last year, if not for the penalties down the stretch. So that may prove to be a little bit of a blessing in disguise for Penn State, depending on where this season goes. But yeah, they have cleaned up the penalties really well. I can only think of like 1 or 2 times this year they've had a good play on offense called back by a holding. Very sound penalty wise. That's always been a trademark of James Franklin teams, though. They've never been teams that have been heavily penalized, especially after his first few years. And, the first 2 to 3 years of Franklin's tenure, you can throw a lot of it out the window because the roster was still such a mess from sanctions and guys who, no knock to them because they really helped the program through a rough time, should not have been playing at Penn State. But yeah, James has always had a really good team on that front, and this year's been no difference. And I agree with you. I would not be surprised if this is a game, 3:30, 4 o'clock on Saturday, everyone talking about is, look at, man, remember that pass interference call, that roughing the passer, that holding that brought back that late run in the fourth quarter. If that we look at something like that as the turning points, I agree with you. These are 2 very evenly matched teams. 2 teams are going to play very similar style of football. And yeah, this definitely feels like a game where a late penalty or even a penalty earlier in the game that leads to points or takes points off the board can be looked back on as one of the biggest plays in the game.
I'm going to throw out for you guys a couple things that really can't be measured. They're more like intangibles that we've seen in the past, or I think everyone kind of agrees on, that go in Michigan's favor. Not just being at home, but Penn State and James Franklin have had the same issue on the road against top 10 opponents that Jim Harbaugh and Michigan's had, is that they're just not successful. Now, I went through those earlier today. I posted a Michigan Penn State preview. Now, the bulk of that's Ohio State. Most of their top 10 losses since James Franklin arrived have been Ohio State games. A couple of Michigan games, like one Michigan State game, and maybe somebody else, maybe. But it's basically, I think he's 0-8 in games against top 10 opponents. And so maybe 5 were Ohio State. But still, that's not been a good thing for James Franklin teams on the road against top 10 opponents. Number 2, obviously, aside from the COVID year, the last couple of trips to Ann Arbor have been brutal. Even with really good Penn State teams, they took it on the chin in Ann Arbor. The other thing that comes to mind is the Penn State, the rushing attack. I made the same comment in this video that Marty made about the Penn State rushing attack's probably better than it's been since Joe Pa was the coach. And, I know a lot of people instantly go to Saquon Barkley, but we're not talking about like a Superman kind of player that had to make guys miss constantly 4 yards deep in the backfield and do his thing. We're talking about like a complete running unit, like offensive linemen, backs. This is really good. And they, my first thought was, but Blake Corum's played in bigger games. The Michigan rushing attack has done it in big games last season, a couple big games this year. For as troubled as Iowa is overall, the rush defense is still exceptional, and Michigan ran it on them on the road. So can Penn State, you're relying on 2 freshmen in the backfield, in the big house, in a big game at the running back position. That just maybe seems like it leans Michigan's favor, some of the things I mentioned.
Yeah, Mark, one of the things that you did say that, talking about those intangible things. For some reason, Penn State's outside of 2020, they tend to always struggle playing at Michigan, and why that is, I'm not exactly sure. I mean, obviously, it's a packed house. From an environment standpoint, I mean, yeah, Michigan Stadium is just as, or if more, uh, intimidating. Intimidating is playing at we're at Penn State, but um, I don't know why they tend to struggle. But one thing is really interesting that you brought up about the rushing attack is when this Michigan defense has been exposed, it's when the running back is able to get past the first level and get to the second level. Now, Colson has been better with filling his gaps at the linebacker position for the most part. But if Mozzie Smith and this interior defensive line, is not able to, and also, gosh, why am I drawing a blank? Who was the kid that stepped up last year, Mark? Help me out here. I'm drawing a blank on his name. The true freshman from Michigan. Why am I drawing a blank on his name? It's not Glasgow, is it?
Who are we talking about here? I'll come up with him.
No. But anyway, if they're not able to do a good enough job at the first level, then yeah, absolutely, those two true freshmen for Penn State will be able to gash us a couple times. But then that leads me to my wild card, Sean Clifford.
They clicked this up in the chat there, Dre, by the way. Mason Graham. Yeah.
Mason Graham. Thank you, D. Brown. Mason Graham. Sean Clifford, he's been up and down throughout his long college career. And this Michigan pass rush has been really exploding the last couple of weeks with the emergence of Mike Morris. And his last name now is Oki, not Anoma, but Oki. He actually changed it during the season.
Okay.
I mean, how has Sean Clifford kind of been this season for the most part, especially when he is under pressure? Has he been susceptible to turnovers? Do you kind of worry about him in a big spot?
I mean, I think any Penn State fan tells you they don't worry about Sean Clifford in a big spot. It's just they got their blue and white goggles on and they're hoping for the best.
Right.
It's weird with Cliff because it's not the turnovers that kill him. He's only thrown 2 interceptions this year. It's not the turnovers that kill Sean Clifford. It's the amount of chunk plays and yards he leaves on the field. It's the times where he'll have a good pocket and he just panics and mechanics go south. He doesn't set his feet and he's missing open receivers. It's when, he doesn't go through his progressions well and tries to force a ball to a guy 10 yards, 12 yards down the field and misses the dump off back out of the backfield, who if you dump it to him is going to go for 7, 8, 9 yards on the first down and move the sticks. So with Sean Clifford, this year at least, it has not been the turnovers that have been a problem. It's been missing the plays that are there to be made. And it's been very inconsistent, which, I mean, I guess the first 5 games in a lot of ways have been his career in a nutshell. Against Purdue, he looks absolutely horrendous in the second half, throws a pick 6 that looks like it's going to bury Penn State. And then on the last drive of the game, looks like he's John Elway against the Cleveland Browns in the playoffs, and he goes to Auburn, second or third play of the game. Owen Papo about knocks him halfway into next century. And then he turns around and scores 4 touchdowns. But then against Central Michigan and Northwestern, probably the 2 worst defenses you're going to play this year, at least the 2 worst teams, maybe not defenses Northwestern, but he looks totally incompetent. Looks like he doesn't know what he's doing. And that's the Sean Clifford experience. It's what we've lived for 4 years. I think what makes this year so much different than past years is in the past, and as anyone who watched Penn State against Iowa last year after Clifford got hurt, what the quarterback situation was like behind him. That's not the case anymore. Drew Allar, man, he last year, number 1 quarterback in the country, 247 Sports had him as like the 2 or 3 overall player in the country. He's looked like the real deal. And I will be very curious to see on Saturday, if Clifford is struggling and Penn State falls behind, and if they're struggling to get the offense going. James Franklin keeps talking how they want to get Allar a series at least in the second quarter of every game, get him at least 1 series with the starting offense. I would be very curious to see Saturday if we get middle of the second quarter, and let's say this thing's like 14-3 Michigan, 10-3 Michigan, Penn State's offense is kind of out there just clodding around. If they give that series to Allar, when he's played this year, he's looked every bit the part of a 5-star quarterback. Excuse me. So, I mean, I think in a lot of ways it might be somewhat comparable to McNamara and McCarthy last year. I'm sure a lot of Michigan fans, they saw McCarthy, they saw how highly rated he was as a true freshman. They saw the talent, and you saw McNamara, similar to Clifford, probably not necessarily play poor enough to lose the job per se, but when you've got that talent behind a quarterback who's playing kind of very average, it's going to rile up a fan base. So yeah, I think Sean
Oh, we
Clifford.
know about that,
Yeah,
Marty. We know
I,
about the hair.
I not to get too far off track, but I'm actually Blake Corum's aunt and uncle, their son and mine are best friends. So like I talk a
Oh,
lot of
wow.
Michigan football with her, and yeah, I understand that. Trust me. But
Yeah.
and so anyway, I will be curious to see if they are willing to give Alar any series if Cliff's struggling Saturday. And I think in a lot of ways, Sean Clifford might be the key to this game, because if you get the Sean Clifford that we saw at Auburn, if we get the Sean Clifford that we've seen at times in the past, we saw against Michigan in 2019 at the whiteout, and obviously totally different because that game was a whiteout game. But if you get anything like that, like the Clifford we saw last year at Kinnick Stadium before he got hurt, we get that Sean Clifford Saturday, I'm going to feel really like if you would tell me that's a Sean Clifford we're getting, I would pick Penn State to win this game just because I think I would trust that Sean Clifford a little bit more than I would trust JJ McCarthy right now. But are you going to get that Sean Clifford? You've got no idea. That's part of the Sean Clifford experience. That's part of what makes every Saturday so wild and wonderful as a Penn State fan, because some days you're going to get great quarterback play out of him. Some days you're going to get horrendous quarterback play. In a lot of games, it just falls somewhere in between. And you just got to hope that when he does miss those open receivers, when he does make that throw off his back foot that sails into the arms of a defender, it either doesn't come back to bite you or you're able to overcome it.
I got to check out in
Hey,
just
Mark,
a second.
sure, you got your last. Mark, you're about to leave here soon, so go ahead, share your closing comments.
Yeah, my last take on Sean Clifford would be I became somewhat of a Sean Clifford fan last season, just knowing they can't run the ball. The entire offense is on his shoulders. They can't run the ball. They give him no offensive support in the running game. He's hurt. He's gutting it out, probably it's 70%, if that, through the last half of the season. And he's actually a really good runner. He's not known for that, but if the defense isn't paying attention, he can really gash you. He's a pretty athletic guy. So he gained a lot of respect from me there. But you're right, Marty. I'm watching the Purdue game, and I don't normally do this at the end of the game. I went back and I watched like the last 3 drives or 4 drives, and there were because I just wanted to see again what I thought I was seeing. And I was watching Sean Clifford's throws, and for about 3 consecutive drives, including that pick 6, which like sailed like 8 feet over the receiver's head right to the defensive back. I'm like seeing him miss not just that throw, like 3rd and 5, boom, misses a throw. It was right there, first down throw. And then the last drive, he can just shake that off, and he throws like 4 dimes, and they win the game. But you're right, Drew Aller comes into the game, and from the very first throw, he throws like an out that just looks like Aaron Rodgers threw it.
It's different when the ball, we always say it's like that starting pitcher who just has that, that easy 97 or 98. The ball just looks different coming out of his hand.
Yeah.
And he makes throws that most human beings are not capable of making. And when he's doing it as an 18-year-old kid, it's tantalizing what it could be. But yeah, one point Mark made there before he had to sign off about Clifford and his legs. That's a big part of his game. And it's something we have not seen much this year. Part of me wonders, he's a guy who every year as a starter has missed at least 1 game due to injury. And part of that's just the way he plays. He plays with a lot of reckless abandon. Like Mark said, the respect thing. There's not a Penn State fan out there that doesn't have the respect out the wazoo for Sean Clifford, because he has put his body on the line for this program for 4 years, has played hurt for this program multiple times. There was a game against Ohio State in Columbus in 2019 where I think going in, Ohio State was ranked number 1. Penn State was like 5 or 6, where Clifford could barely walk and went out there and gave it everything he had, and Penn State only lost by like 8. He's tough as nails. But to circle back to that running game, we haven't seen a lot of it yet this year, and I wonder if that's because, especially once Penn State got past Auburn, like, all right, we're going to be 5-0 when we hit this Michigan, Minnesota, Ohio State stretch that's going to define our season. Let's save the mileage on his legs. Let's try and save the hits he's taking. So when we go to Ann Arbor, when Ohio State comes to town, he's fresh, he can run, he can do what makes him best, because that's when Sean Clifford is at his best, when he can run around, he can improvise, allow receivers to get open, pick up first down with his legs. So I will be very curious to see on Saturday if we see them run Sean Clifford a lot more than we've seen this year. And part of that also is, again, having a Lar behind Clifford. If Clifford gets knocked out of the game, gets banged up, you're not going to be nearly as concerned as you were in the past about what you do at quarterback then.
Yeah, and we've actually had similar concerns about JJ. I know myself and my co-host Desmond. We have brought up how we've noticed JJ hasn't been utilizing his legs as much the last couple of weeks, and I'm not sure if you noticed. You probably do since you have a connection to Michigan. But our primary back, okay, McNamara, is actually out with an injury right now, and some of the speculation is that maybe JJ is either trying to be smarter with his decision making, just trying to protect himself in general, or he's kind of gotten an edict from Harbaugh saying, "Hey, look, our backup quarterback situation is a little bit different right now. Cade's out, so we really need you to protect yourself because you can't afford to lose you for the game." So that's also an element that we've been looking internally here in Michigan. Is look, JJ's part of the allure with JJ is not only his arm, but he's very, very athletic. Now he's not Lamar Jackson type athletic, but he's very, very mobile. And he likes to run. He looks forward to it. Actually, a little bit too much. Sometimes I wish he would slide and not take certain hits. But that is something that I'm very interested to see if he's going to utilize more versus Penn State. Because look, as you've noted and other people recognize as well, Penn State has a pretty good pass rushing attacks, especially with Joey Porter Jr. And what if the play does break down? Is he not going to be afraid to use his legs to extend the play, or just take off? A lot of times, Marty, you ever notice, and I love when I see quarterbacks do this, is that especially if it's like a 3rd and long, and your offense is in a spread formation, you spread the defense totally out, and if the defense is a man-to-man, a lot of times the middle of the field is wide open, right? Because everybody's going to their assigned man. And a lot of times, the quarterback, if they want to, as long as there's a little bit of a gap in their pass protection, they can just take off and get it easy, 6 or 7 yards, if they wanted to. And if you have an athletic guy, they can get even more. So those are the type of situations that, in awareness, that I would like to see JJ have. And I would say, from a big game standpoint, this is the biggest game JJ has ever started. And with that being said, I'm a little bit nervous about his approach. Would he try to do too much? But what does give me solace is, this kid has passed a test every single time. We were worried at first, at least I was, with the competition that Michigan had compared to Penn State is not even close. We had a very, very cupcake schedule to start the season. And when JJ took over, he was playing well, but he really wasn't being tested. And, his first test was against Maryland. He did well, made a couple mistakes, but he passed the test. Then he went to Iowa and played well again. So, like I said, he's been getting better week to week, but this is a very, very fast and athletic team. And he is susceptible to make a mistake just due to his youth. You just never know when a young guy like that. So, I don't know. What's Penn State's, at least from Penn State fans' perspective of, JJ McCarthy? Is he somebody that you guys, I would never use the word fear. He doesn't have that kind of reputation yet. He has to build more of a resume. But he's somebody you guys kind of look kind of worried, like, man, this kid's very talented. We need to watch out for. What's your guys' view on him?
I mean, I can't speak for all Penn State fans, but I know I can speak for my cohorts of Black Shoe Diaries and a lot of friends of mine who are Penn State fans, people I talk to regularly. We definitely were all hoping that Cade McNamara would win the starting quarterback job. And a lot of that is, and that's not even a knock on McNamara. It's just, you kind of know what he is. McCarthy, like you said, you don't totally know what he is, but you see the talent there, and that's what scares you as an opponent. Has McCarthy put it all together yet? No, but if he does, you're probably talking about one of the best quarterbacks in the Big Ten, maybe in the entire country. The kid, like you said, he's got that arm talent. He needs to refine it, but it's there. He can hurt you with his legs. So I definitely think he's a quarterback who worries Penn State fans. I think any Penn State fan tells you they don't worry about McCarthy and his just pure talent ability is lying to you. But I think one good point you made is just being his first like real big test as a starting quarterback. I mean, yeah, he went to Kinnick Stadium. Yeah, that Iowa defense is still legit. But when you're facing an opposing offense that you know is going to struggle to get the 10
Yeah,
points,
yeah,
it's like you're going to
it
first off, you're going to
helps.
call a totally different offense. Because I remember watching that game and Michigan got the ball, goes down, scores, make it 7-0. I'm like, all right, this is over. Like Iowa's not
Yeah.
matching. It's not sort of 7-0. So you're going to call a different game. You don't have to worry about, being so fine with things and so perfect. And this is
Mhm.
a Penn State defense that anyone who is a big time college football fan who's watched Manny Diaz defenses over the years, this is a Manny Diaz defense to a T. They're going to give up chunk plays because they're uberly aggressive, but because they're uberly aggressive, they're going to force 2 or 3 turnovers a game. They're going to be in your quarterback's face. They're going to be getting 2 or 3 sacks, and that's what Manny Diaz wants. And against a quarterback like McCarthy, who is younger in the first real big test, and maybe he feels like he might have something to prove, that could be somewhere you could exploit that as a defense and try and take advantage. And, as much as I, don't have a ton of confidence most weeks in Sean Clifford just because he's so inconsistent, that is one thing this Saturday about Sean Clifford I do feel good about is he's played in so many games like this before. The stage isn't, I'm not saying the stage would be too big for JJ McCarthy, but it's definitely not going to be too big for Sean Clifford. And if Sean Clifford comes out and makes an early mistake, like Mark talked about, he's so good at brushing that off and rolling with it. If McCarthy starts 2 of 8 with an INT, how does he respond to that? You would know better than me, but have they ever really seen a game where McCarthy started slow like that and he's had to bounce back, especially against a defense of this caliber? So I think if you're Penn State's defense, you want to try and jump on McCarthy early, even if it's just, getting pressure on him, getting hits in when you can to where he might start to double think things or get happy feet in the pocket, whatever it is. I do think, I guess I think he's uberly talented. There's no doubt about that. But he's still a young quarterback who, if you start to knock him around, you start to make him overthink some things, his own mind, I feel, could potentially get him in some trouble.
Yeah, for sure. Now, look, statistically, JJ has been, getting better. Look, he had 300 yards, last week. He played exceptionally well, as D Brown. A lot of people, a lot of our loyal, we love them. Our lawyer subscribers like to point out. They feel like JJ doesn't give his due. I do give him his due, but the way I look at things, man, it's proven ground, right? And
Mhm.
I think for both these teams, this is a huge test. When you're a team like, especially this year, I used to have MSU in this category too, but they are terrible and they don't deserve to be in this category. But Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State, these are 3 programs that are on a trajectory to not only win the Big Ten, because we know the West is terrible. No one in the West can play with either of these 3 teams, but to make it to a college football playoff and maybe even win a game, right? You know, I look at it from, step by step basis, right? Okay, how's the team trending? Well, how's this side of the ball? How's the other side of the ball? Who are the emerging players? Who are the returning players and how are they doing this year, right? Who are the guys that are unforeseen? And JJ is a huge part of that here because he his raw ability unlocks this offense chances to be something they've never been before, which is I've never seen Michigan have an offense where their quarterback is equally a running and passing threat, a dominant two tandem running back situation, and really tap in on the outside. Now, on paper, they had that. They had that, right? But it's still coming together. It's still coming together, and JJ's maturation process is going to be pretty much the glue to that. So that's why I'm very, very like, hey, I want to make sure he's doing the right things. I'm very hard on him because he's been missing deep shots down the field. That could be huge in this game. You
Mm-hmm.
know, like this would be one of those games where I think the scoring margin is going to be very, very small. It could be a field goal difference, right? Well, if Michigan somehow, we get a guy, Roman Wilson, I believe he's healthy enough to play this game. He's one of our speeches on the team. He gets one of you guys beat on the outside and JJ overshoots him. That could be the difference in winning and losing. So, it's one of those things where, man, I think the margin of error is going to be very small.
Mm-hmm. No, I totally agree. every Friday we have our staff-wide preview going on Black Sheet Irish for the game, and I was typing mine up last night, and that was one of the things I said was this game may come down to which quarterback makes the throws most consistently, which quarterback misses the least amount of deep shots and things of that nature. Because I think it's two quarterbacks who, in their own different ways have something to prove on Saturday. And I think they're two teams that, and that's one of the ways these teams are very evenly matched is with the quarterbacks. Again, they have talent, but they have something to prove still. I think both teams are expecting to run the ball well. I think both teams expect their defense to play well. And shocker to say a quarterback game may come down to, or a football game, may come down to the quarterback play. But yeah, I agree with you. If Roman Wilson gets behind somebody and McCarthy misses them, and that you could look back on that, like we said earlier with the big penalty. I think everyone expects this to be a close game. Those are the kind of plays you look back on and you're kicking yourself over. And, I think Penn State fans, myself included, will turn around and tell you we feel the same way. If a Mitchell Tinsley or Keandre Lambert-Smith, one of our top receivers, are able to get behind a Michigan defender and Cliff misses them, you might sit back and circle that play as one that comes back to bite you. So, yeah, I definitely think that, in their own separate ways, both quarterbacks have something to prove on Saturday. And ultimately, I would not be surprised to see this game come down to which quarterback, plays the cleanest game and makes the least amount of mistakes.
Yeah, one thing I don't want to see, man, and it tends to happen every big game like this. And for God's sake, especially in the NFL, we've seen it really bad with roughing the passing calls.
Yep.
But I really don't want to see any kid get thrown out from a targeting call. But it seems to
Absolutely.
happen every big game.
Yep.
It would obviously it would help Michigan, but I don't want to see Jordan Porter Jr. thrown out for a targeting
Yes.
call, right? I don't want to see Carlson, Miley Smith thrown out for a targeting
Yep.
call. I want to see both these teams at their best. And that's one of the things that I'm hoping for too, man. I hope that the officials let these kids play.
Mhm.
Both these teams are really good, and let's just see who's the better team, mano a mano. Let's if I could put an edict out there, if I was the referee commissioner or whatever it is, and say, hey guys, for the most part, let's let these kids play,
Yep.
and let's not get involved in a game like this.
No, I totally agree. And I think no matter what caliber the game is, unless it's something egregious or something where you miss someone getting hurt, keep the flag in your pocket. Let the kids decide the game. Especially when like this, like you said, it's two of the 10 best teams in the country. And it's not even that they're both ranked in the top 10. I think anyone who eye test resumes thus far, they've played like two of the top 10 teams in the country. Between they both have a really good commanding road victory. 2 in Penn State's case with Purdue. They both have multiple blowout wins over Power 5 opponents. Like there are a few teams that in the middle of October are going to have the resume these two teams do, have looked as good as these teams do, and have recruited as well as these teams have over the course of the last 3, 4, 5 years. Like you
NFL
said,
talent too, man.
Yeah,
like Penn
both have
State.
won 10 titles in the last 6 years. Both have multiple first-round picks on their rosters. Like this is the kind of game as a college football fan you salivate over. So yeah, just let the kids decide it. I hope, because if we wake up Saturday morning, depending on what Big Ten ref we find out gets this game, because there definitely are some real, interesting referees in the Big Ten, to put it kindly. Now, thankfully, Dave Whitfit, who's the worst of them all, is no longer officiating Big Ten games. But
Right.
yeah, no, it's. I just hope that it's a clean played game and well called in the officials, especially in the targeting stuff, man. Because like you said, I don't want. The last thing I want to see happen too is someone from Michigan, a big player, get tossed. Penn State wins the game, and you don't ever want the opposing fan base to have that in their back pocket either. Oh well, if Mozzie Smith wasn't thrown out of this game, if so and so wasn't thrown out of the, I don't want to. I don't, even as a Penn State fan, take like Chop Robinson, their best pass rusher. Let's say he gets thrown out for targeting. I don't even want to be sitting there wondering, man, what if Chop doesn't get thrown out of the game? What if on that big third down pass McCarthy hit in the fourth quarter when Michigan scored the go-ahead touchdown, if Robinson was out there to pressure him? You don't want to be thinking that either. So yeah, just hopefully it's a clean played game. It's a well-called game, and it looks like a game between two of the 10 best teams in the country, and the officials let the teams decide it.
Yeah. All right. We're on the same page there. And, Marty, before we wrap here, man, last thing I really have for you is I can tell you from here, right? James Franklin, the biggest knock on him is, look, well, for one, I start what he does well. He's a heck of a recruiter.
Mhm.
I think from a program standpoint, very just like Michigan. Well, I can actually give both teams a compliment this way. Both these programs recruit very well. Both of them do an excellent job of getting that talent ready ready for the NFL. However, one of the knocks on James Franklin that we hear here is his in-game decisions can be very, very spotty. And I'm curious from a Penn State fan perspective, how do you view his in-game decision making?
I agree that that's been one of the biggest issues with him since he's been here. I also feel it is improved. I think when he first got here, it was easy to kind of overlook the fact he'd only been a head coach for 3 years, and you're going to learn on the job. And yes, it's in the SEC, but there's a huge difference between coaching at Vanderbilt and coaching at Penn State, obviously. I also don't think it's a coincidence that as his career at Penn State's gone on, they've gotten further and further away from the sanctions. The roster's gotten more and more talented. His in-game decision-making has seemed to improve. Because when you have more talent, you can overcome mistakes, and things that may have been a poor choice work out and don't look like as poor of a choice. But no, the big thing with him, I think his time management is where he has improved the most as a head coach. He's gotten much better with timeout usage. He's gotten much better in the middle eight, which I think, to steal a line from Dabo Sweeney, the middle eight is very important in football games. That's one area James Franklin has improved tenfold as a head coach. And even late in the games, when they've had the lead, he's gotten a lot better with his time management play. And not necessarily his play calling, because he's not the one playing the call or calling the plays, but, signing off and a little bit more aggressiveness to put games away. And I think the biggest thing with James is when he's at his best, he's always let his defense coordinator be the head coach of the defense. Rather it was Brent Pry or now Manny Diaz. But when he's at his best, he lets his offense coordinator be the head coach of the offense. When Joe Moorhead was here, Moorhead 100% called and ran everything. And we saw what happened. They won 22-4, won a Big Ten title, went to the Rose Bowl, and won a Fiesta Bowl. That's about as good as you're going to get in a 2-year stretch for any program. With Mike Yurcich, same thing. Let's Mike Yurcich be the head coach of this offense. And when Mike Yurcich has had a healthy starting quarterback, this offense has been really good. So I think the biggest thing with James is just being hands off with the offense, which he's done with Yurcich, offense coordinator, and his time management has improved a lot since he's gotten here. There's always going to be Penn State fans who are going to have complaints of him as a head coach in game. Every coach is going to make mistakes, but is he going to ever be a top 10 game day coach? Probably not. But again, he's improved a lot. And early in his tenure, it was easy to point at games where some of his decision-making tied directly to Penn State losing. It's tough to do that now. I really couldn't tell you the last time I would chalk up a loss due to a very poor coaching decision. And
Something very definitive.
yeah.
You could say.
Like you might say,
yeah.
oh man, this play call here or there, but something very definitive. I could not tell you the last time Penn State lost a game like that. So I do think while his in-game coaching still leaves something to be desired, it definitely has improved.
Yeah. And from Harbaugh, talking about Harbaugh, from Michigan, one of the biggest gripes that I have had, I know my co-host Des has had as well, is we always wanted him to open up the Michigan playbook, right? And no, he's not off. Harbaugh's not calling the plays per se, but he's putting a stamp of approval on the offensive strategy going into the week. And even with having a more dynamic quarterback like J.J. McCarthy, he still seems to have more of a conservative type of approach. He wants to run the football first, right? He wants to establish the run game and wants to basically go off that, right? And for the most part, every week, because Michigan is a superior team, that's very, very effective. And, last year, it was a formula that worked in tandem with a very disruptive defense that took them all the way to the playoffs. But with Penn State being improved on both sides of the ball this year, it seems, do you think having more of that conservative type of approach is if you were to put yourself, know what you know about Penn State, into a Michigan fan seat, do you think that's the best way to beat Penn State, or do you think they should open it up to expose some weaknesses or areas of that Penn State defense?
Yeah, I think you need to open it up to beat this Penn State defense. The offense that has had the most success this year against Penn State by far was Purdue, and Purdue threw the ball 58 times. And I understand, as we talked about early in the show, this secondary is tremendous, probably the best in the Big Ten, one of the best in the country. However, the one area this defense can be exploited, and this is something Purdue did with a lot of success, and Ohio and Central Michigan tried to do, but when you're Ohio and Central Michigan, you just don't have the talent for it. A lot of slants and crossing routes, because the linebackers, as I mentioned earlier, the biggest question mark on this team. And that's an area that can be exploited, this middle of the field. And I know that's something Michigan likes to do. Last year, the biggest play of that game was that crossing route. I believe it was Eric All coming across the middle on Michigan's final drive when the down scored the winning touchdown. That probably won them that game, was that crossing route that exploited this defense. And it is still something that can exploit this defense. So if I'm Jim Harbaugh, I'm going to come out, I'm going to be aggressive, coming across the middle, crossing routes, slants, trying to exploit these linebackers. Not an all Penn State linebackers at all, but outside of Curtis Jacobs and Abdul Carter, and Abdul Carter is a true freshman, so he's going to have some true freshman moments. There's just not a ton of talent there right now. So if I'm Michigan, I'm very aggressively attacking the middle level of this Penn State defense with slants, with crossing routes on Saturday, because I think that's the best way to beat this Penn State defense.
Gotcha. Well, from what we actually, we want to thank Brian for his super chat, read what he has to say. Now, you may not know this, Marty, but last week I made the comment that I don't see JJ McCarthy as special. Now, and I left, mind you, I left that to be determined. Like, I can change that opinion. And just because when I said that, I wasn't insinuating that he's not really, really good, or he can't be, he can't become special one day. But you got to understand, and you probably have heard, this kid had a lot of hype, not just a good quarterback, right? Hype. No, this kid's special. He's going to be a legend at the University of Michigan by the time he leaves. Well, that means I have a very high expectation. And I think he has the tools, right? The skill set, the raw ability to be special, but he's not quite put it all together. So that's the context of why I believe Brian said that. So Brian, thank you for the super chat, and I will gladly read this. JJ not special, question mark. Number one country in completion percentage, number one against the blitz and pressure, 8th in yards per attempt. Brian, he is a very talented kid, but he has a lot to put together before he can fully realize that hype, right? So until he does that, I have to right to reserve the fact that I don't know if he's special yet, but he can prove that. And here's a good thing. This week, Saturday versus Penn State, a very good opponent. He has a great opportunity to show at that next level. So, but thank you again, Brian. All right, Marty. So before we wrap, how about you talk to us about the post-game show and where they can find you?
Yeah, absolutely. Tim and I do our post-game show on the Penn State channel, the Voice of College Football Penn State. If you don't subscribe to us, please subscribe. Obviously, we talk a lot of Penn State, but we try and talk the rest of the Big Ten schedule on there every Saturday too, so you can get some input on us and our feelings about the rest of the Big Ten. You can find me at Black Shoe Diaries, blackshoediaries.com of SB Nation. Follow Black Shoe Diaries on Twitter, on Facebook. My personal Twitter is MSJ41817. A lot of college football talk outside of just Penn State on there. A lot of football and baseball and hockey and just sports talk in general. So yeah, feel free to follow along, check it out. If you're ever looking for some Penn State information as a Michigan fan, or just some Big Ten banter in general.
Sounds good, man. Well, we really appreciate your time. Thank you for the insight. I think that we're both our fan bases are in store for a highly competitive game. Unfortunately, someone will have to lose and feel some pain afterwards. But the good thing I will say at this portion of the season, and both fan bases can take solace in this, is that look, last year, Michigan lost to MSU, right? And it seemed like all hope was lost for them, and they were able to run the table the rest of the way, and they still was able to complete their goals. So I think the same thing applies for both these teams. If whoever loses, it will hurt, but both the goals are still on the table, and so we should have a good time Saturday.
Absolutely, man. I'm looking forward to it. Like you said, it should be a hell of a game. Hopefully one of the best games here in college football. And yeah, thanks for having me on. I really enjoyed it.
All right. Take care, guys. We'll see you next week.